In the stillness of the night, London's forgotten corners often whisper secrets to those who dare to listen. Deep beneath the bustling streets, the abandoned underground station of St. Paul's Court lay shrouded in darkness. The once vibrant hub, now a ghost of its former self, echoed with the faint hum of old machinery and the soft, almost imperceptible murmurs of bygone voices. The air was thick with the scent of damp stone and mildew, a stark contrast to the world above, where life moved ceaselessly forward. The station had been closed for decades, sealed off after a mysterious incident that claimed several lives. Official records were vague, leaving the true nature of the tragedy shrouded in mystery. Yet, rumors persisted. Locals spoke in hushed tones of shadowy figures glimpsed in the corners of their eyes, of cold spots that chilled to the bone, and of the echoes of faint cries that seemed to emanate from nowhere. It was these stories that had drawn Dr. Eleanor Green, a historian with a passion for urban legends, to the station. Known for her rigorous methodology and healthy skepticism, Eleanor was intrigued by the persistent tales of supernatural occurrences tied to St. Paul's Court. Could there be more to these stories than mere folklore? As she stood at the entrance to the station, Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. The stories she'd heard were the kind that lingered in the mind, gnawing at one's curiosity. They spoke of an accident, a cover-up, and restless spirits seeking resolution. But what had really happened in these tunnels? And why did the past refuse to stay buried? Eleanor was determined to find out. She believed that every legend had a kernel of truth, a hidden story waiting to be uncovered. With her notebook in hand and her senses on high alert, she prepared to descend into the darkness, unaware of the profound journey she was about to undertake. Sometimes, she mused to herself, the most interesting stories are those that history tries to forget. As she stepped into the shadows, the silence of the station seemed to deepen, wrapping around her like a shroud. The past, it seemed, was ready to reveal its secrets. Dr. Eleanor Green had always been drawn to the unexplained. Her office, cluttered with books and artifacts, was a testament to her life's work, a blend of history and legend. Educated at some of the finest institutions in the UK, Eleanor had built her reputation on meticulously researched books that bridged the gap between academia and popular history. Her latest project, however, was different. It was personal. Eleanor had heard about the abandoned stations of the London Underground from a friend who worked in urban planning. These stations, relics of a bygone era, were often left to decay, their histories overshadowed by newer developments. But St. Paul's Court had a particularly dark reputation. The tales of spectral apparitions and unexplained phenomena intrigued her, especially since they persisted despite being dismissed by many as mere folklore. It was during a routine meeting at the Historical Society that Eleanor's curiosity was piqued further. An elderly member, Mr. Carter, casually mentioned that he had once met a woman who claimed to have seen something in one of the tunnels. He dismissed it as the ramblings of an old lady, but Eleanor sensed a deeper story. Curiosity might have killed the cat, she thought with a wry smile, but it's a historian's lifeblood. Her interest now fully engaged, she decided to dig deeper, both literally and figuratively. The first step was to gain access to the station, a task that required navigating bureaucratic red tape. As she made the necessary arrangements, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that she was on the verge of uncovering something significant. The question was, what? With access secured, Eleanor found herself standing at the entrance of St. Paul's Court Station, accompanied by Simon Clark, a journalist intrigued by her investigation. The air was cooler here, and the sounds of the city above felt distant, almost like a memory. As they descended into the depths of the station, the passageways widened into a dimly lit platform. The walls, once adorned with vibrant posters and advertisements, were now covered in a film of dust and grime. The faint flicker of their flashlights cast long shadows, adding to the eerie atmosphere. Eleanor's pulse quickened as they ventured deeper. She began to notice subtle signs of disturbance, faint footprints in the dust, discarded items from another era, and the chilling sensation of being watched. Simon, ever the skeptic, joked about the friendly ghosts they might encounter, but Eleanor was focused, scanning the area for clues. It was then that she felt it, a sudden drop in temperature, accompanied by a faint whisper that seemed to echo through the tunnels. She turned sharply, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, but saw nothing. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hear what?" Simon replied, looking around with feigned casualness, though his unease was evident. Ignoring his dismissive tone, Eleanor continued to listen. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, though still unintelligible. They seemed to be calling out, pleading, but for what? As they moved further, Eleanor stumbled upon an old newspaper clipping, yellowed with age and half buried under debris. It was a report about an accident, a fire in the tunnels that had caused several deaths. The details were sparse, but it was clear that something had been concealed. The weight of the find hit Eleanor. This was more than just a story. It was a tragedy that had left its mark on the very stones of the station. She knew she had to learn more, to understand the voices that whispered in the dark. Back in her study, Eleanor pored over the newspaper clipping, her mind racing with questions. What had caused the fire? Why were the details so vague? And most importantly, who were the victims? She needed more information, and quickly. She decided to consult the archives, seeking out records and personal accounts from the time of the incident. The library, with its musty smell of old paper and quiet atmosphere, became her second home. Days turned into nights as she sifted through documents, piecing together a narrative that had been all but forgotten. Simon, intrigued by her findings and sensing a story, offered his assistance. His access to media archives and knack for digging up details that others overlooked proved invaluable. Together, they uncovered a series of reports and witness statements that hinted at a cover-up, something far more sinister than a simple accident. The more they discovered, the clearer it became that the victims had been overlooked, their stories buried along with the truth. One account, in particular, stood out. A description of a woman seen near the station just before the fire, her identity unknown but her presence noted by multiple witnesses. As they pieced together these fragments, the picture that emerged was haunting. The station was not just a site of tragedy, but a place of unresolved histories. The whispers and the cold spots were more than just ghost stories. They were echoes of lives cut short, of stories left untold. Eleanor felt a growing sense of urgency. She was no longer just an observer. She was becoming a part of the story, drawn in by the spirit's call for acknowledgement. But she knew that uncovering the truth would not be easy, especially with the forces that sought to keep it hidden. The deeper Eleanor and Simon dug, the more disturbing the story became. They discovered that the fire, which had been officially recorded as an unfortunate accident, had actually claimed more lives than initially reported. The victims were mostly transient workers, whose deaths were hastily swept under the rug by authorities eager to avoid scandal. Eleanor stumbled upon a crucial piece of evidence in a dusty, forgotten ledger in the city's records office. The ledger contained a list of compensation payments made to the families of the victims, payments that were suspiciously small and made under the condition of silence. This discovery pointed to a deliberate effort to cover up the incident and minimize its impact. As they investigated further, they learned about a woman named Margaret Thompson, an elderly resident who had once worked as a nurse. Margaret had been present at the time of the fire, tending to the injured in the immediate aftermath. Intrigued, Eleanor and Simon arranged to meet her. Margaret's account was harrowing. She described the chaos and confusion, the screams echoing through the tunnels, and the desperate efforts to save those trapped. She spoke of the shadowy figures she had seen, victims and perhaps something more. According to Margaret, the authorities had quickly cordoned off the area, controlling information and preventing her and others from speaking out. The most chilling part of Margaret's story was her belief that the spirits of the deceased still lingered, seeking recognition and peace. She described seeing apparitions in the tunnels, including a young woman who seemed to be trying to communicate something, her face twisted in sorrow. Eleanor felt a deepening resolve. The evidence pointed to a gross injustice that had been buried along with the victims. The whispers in the tunnels were not just random phenomena. They were voices crying out for truth and justice. She realized that bringing this story to light was not just about solving a mystery. It was about giving the forgotten a voice. Eleanor and Simon decided to conduct another visit to St. Paul's Court, this time armed with the knowledge they had gathered. They wanted to see if they could connect more directly with the spirits and understand what they sought. As they descended into the tunnels, the atmosphere felt charged, almost electric. Eleanor felt the familiar chill and heard the faint whispers, now more distinct. They set up audio and visual equipment, hoping to capture evidence of the paranormal activity. As they waited in the eerie silence, the air around them seemed to thicken. Suddenly, the temperature dropped sharply, and the whispers grew louder, coalescing into discernible words. "Help us," a voice seemed to say, filled with a sorrow that chilled Eleanor to her core. Then, a ghostly figure materialized before them. A young woman, her expression a mix of despair and pleading. She pointed towards a darkened corridor, her form flickering like a candle in the wind. Eleanor felt a surge of emotion, a mix of fear, empathy, and a desperate need to understand. Simon, his skepticism shaken, whispered, "Are we really seeing this?" The apparition led them to a previously unnoticed alcove, where they found an old, rusted metal box. Inside were personal effects, photographs, letters, and a small journal. These items, belonging to the victims, painted a poignant picture of the lives lost in the tragedy. The journal contained entries from a worker who had been at the station during the fire, detailing the unsafe conditions and the warnings that had gone unheeded. This discovery solidified Eleanor's belief that the spirits were seeking acknowledgement, a validation of their existence and the injustice they had suffered. The spectral figures they had seen were not merely haunting the station. They were reaching out for recognition, hoping that someone would finally tell their story. Buoyed by their discoveries, Eleanor and Simon prepared to present their findings to the public. They contacted a local news station, planning a feature to shed light on the forgotten tragedy and the spirits haunting St. Paul's Court. However, their efforts soon met with resistance. City officials, alerted to Eleanor's investigation, issued a statement dismissing her findings as sensationalist and unfounded. They emphasized that the abandoned stations were off-limits for a reason, citing public safety concerns and dismissing any talk of ghosts as mere superstition. Eleanor and Simon's work was labeled a publicity stunt, undermining their credibility. This opposition intensified when a member of the paranormal community, who had initially offered support, publicly accused Eleanor of fabricating evidence to gain attention. This betrayal was a severe blow, casting doubt on their entire investigation. The person had leaked selective and misleading information to discredit them, likely in collusion with those who wanted the story buried. Undeterred, Eleanor and Simon pushed forward, determined to honor the spirit's plea for justice. They sought out more witnesses and collected testimonies from those who had experienced the paranormal phenomena firsthand. Among them was Margaret Thompson, whose detailed accounts lent further credence to their claims. As the backlash grew, so did the threats. Eleanor began receiving anonymous messages warning her to stop the investigation, hinting at dire consequences if she continued. The pressure mounted, and Simon suggested they take a step back for their safety. But Eleanor refused. "We can't stop now," she insisted. "These people, these spirits, they deserve to be heard. We owe it to them to tell their story." With Simon's support, they decided to hold a public meeting to present all the evidence they had gathered, inviting the press and local community. This would be their last stand, a chance to reveal the truth and confront the forces trying to silence them. The public meeting was held in a community hall near the station, drawing a diverse crowd. There were skeptics, supporters, and those merely curious about the controversy. The atmosphere was tense, filled with anticipation and doubt. Eleanor and Simon stood at the front, flanked by their findings, documents, photographs, and recordings. Eleanor began by recounting the history of St. Paul's Court, emphasizing the human cost of the tragedy. She presented the journal and letters found in the station, letting the voices of the past speak for themselves. As she read aloud from the journal, the room fell silent, the words painting a vivid picture of the neglect and fear that had led to the disaster. Simon played the audio recordings they had captured, the whispers of, "Help us," echoing through the hall, sending shivers down the spines of those present. He spoke about the paranormal activity, not as a gimmick, but as a plea for recognition from those who had been forgotten. The turning point came when Margaret Thompson took the floor. Her emotional testimony about the night of the fire, the rushed cover-up, and the subsequent hauntings moved many to tears. Her credibility, as someone with no vested interest, lent significant weight to Eleanor and Simon's claims. Just as it seemed the tide was turning in their favor, the temperature in the hall plummeted. A cold breeze swept through the room, and the lights flickered. Gasps filled the air as ghostly figures appeared. Faint but unmistakable, the spirits of St. Paul's Court had come to bear witness. In the stunned silence that followed, Eleanor addressed the audience. These souls have been trapped, their stories untold. We are their voice, and it is time we listen. The apparitions faded, leaving a hushed and reflective audience. The impact was undeniable. The story could no longer be dismissed. The evidence, both physical and supernatural, had made it clear. The truth had been uncovered, and the spirits had been acknowledged. The public reaction to the meeting was overwhelming. News outlets, once skeptical, now ran stories on the St. Paul's Court tragedy and the paranormal events. The city authorities, facing mounting public pressure and undeniable evidence, announced a formal investigation into the incident and the subsequent cover-up. Eleanor and Simon were hailed as heroes by some, although they still faced criticism from those who dismissed the paranormal aspects of their findings. Despite this, they felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The spirits, once restless and unseen, had finally been acknowledged, their stories brought into the light. In the days following the meeting, Eleanor reflected on the journey. She realized that her investigation had been about more than uncovering a historical truth. It had been about justice and the human need for acknowledgement. The spirits' manifestations were not just supernatural phenomena. They were a cry for their lives to be remembered and respected. Simon, too, found himself changed by the experience. His initial skepticism had given way to a deeper understanding of the complexities of history and the ways in which it can continue to affect the present. He penned a series of articles detailing their findings, careful to balance the historical facts with the personal stories of those involved. The city announced plans to create a memorial at the site, honoring the victims of the tragedy. For Eleanor, this was a bittersweet victory. The past had been acknowledged, and the spirits could now rest. But the journey had also revealed how easily truth can be obscured and forgotten. As the memorial took shape, Eleanor and Simon continued their work, now viewed as advocates for historical truth and justice. They knew that this story, like many others, was part of a broader tapestry of forgotten histories waiting to be told. St. Paul's Court Station, once a silent witness to a forgotten tragedy, was now a place of remembrance. The new memorial stood at the entrance, a simple plaque inscribed with the names of the victims and a brief account of the incident. Flowers and notes from visitors adorned the site, a testament to the power of storytelling and the human need for connection. Eleanor stood before the memorial, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. The spirits that had haunted the station were no longer restless. Their stories had been told, their existence acknowledged. The whispers that had once filled the air were gone, replaced by a peaceful silence. As she turned to leave, her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from an anonymous source, hinting at another site in London with a dark history and unexplained occurrences. Eleanor felt a familiar stir of curiosity. There were always more stories to uncover, more truths to bring to light. Simon joined her, and they walked away from the station, discussing the next steps in their journey. The city bustled around them, unaware of the silent stories that lay beneath its streets. Eleanor knew that as long as there were voices to be heard, she would continue to listen, to investigate, and to tell the tales that history had forgotten. The spirits of St. Paul's Court were at peace, but Eleanor and Simon's work was far from over. As they looked toward the future, they were ready to face whatever mysteries awaited them, knowing that some stories, like the spirits they encountered, refused to remain silent. If you enjoyed unraveling this, you're in for another spine-tingling tale. Click the video on your screen to discover more eerie stories from the Phantom Story Society, where history's darkest secrets come to life. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Until next time, stay curious and beware of the shadows.